going to introduce myself. My own name is John O'Loughlin. IGA council member. I'm delighted to be chairing this session. Two things I want to do before we start. I want to thank Liz Duffy, who's done all the organising with Maura as well, to organise this event. And Philip asked me to remind everyone that there is a sheet of paper, a competition on every seat, and if you fill it out and hand it in before lunch would be great. Now it's a bit of a trick question by Philip because there is still a little bit of confusion about CBAM, etc. So he'll take a couple of different answers on it as right answers. The way we're going to run this session is that Mick Donovan is going to give a 20-minute presentation, and then we're going to have very much a conversational discussion with Kevin and John, and we want an awful lot of engagement from the crowd as well, so we would be delighted as much questions that you've stored in the locker, don't be afraid to ask them. There's roving mics, and there's plenty of people in Irish Grassland Association jackets there as well. So my first job is going to introduce Michael O'Donovan, Professor Michael O'Donovan. I'm going to call him Mick for the rest of the presentation. So Mick is the head of grassland science at Teagasc. He's an adjunct professor at UCD and UCC. He's an industry leader, in my opinion, and in the opinion of probably most people in the room. He's responsible for grassland management and measurement, probably as we know it in Ireland. You know, so a huge contribution to grassland science. And I was trying to think of something funny to say, but the fact that I have to chair the session with him, I was hoping he wouldn't give me any digs back. So I said the best way to describe Mick, and I leave this up to your own interpretation, in my opinion, is that he's like the Roy Keane of grassland science in Ireland. You know, driving standards and driving the whole thing forward. So Mick, I'm going to invite you up now to give your presentation, and then we're going to come back up on stage. I'll introduce Kevin and John, and we're all going to sit down here and have a bit of a conversation. So Mick, thanks.
Really nice to be asked back to the IGA to give a talk on grassland. Just a small story to say. The last time I spoke at the grassland, myself and John Mack were talking, and we had to call to Ballyhooly, to Ballyday, to collect Paddy O'Keefe on the way to Silver Springs. And so collected Paddy. John sat into the back, I was driving, and from Ballyday to Silver Springs in Cork, the two of us went through the biggest cross-examination of grassland costs, future. And when we got out of the car in Cork, Paddy goes to me, I think it'll be a good conference. He knows the stuff. He was referring to John. So, I'm sure Paddy's up there telling us to keep driving on, so that's what we'll do. So the title of the talk today, and I changed it from the brochure because I wanted to be a bit more provocative. Is growing 15-ton of grass possible or impossible? And I had a question mark on it yesterday and I took it off. So this is very possible. We just have to get onto the bus. So I'm going to acknowledge my two co-authors, Mike Legan and Caitlin Newman. Again, Lawrence gave you a synopsis of this in the last session. Pasture utilisation, is a key profit driver. And Joe Patton gave you this slide for those of you at the dairy conference in November, December. And this is the profit monitor data. Every tonne of grass utilised in 2024 is worth about €330 per hectare. But again, confirming what Lawrence said in the last session, it encapsulates about 40% of the variation in margin per hectare. It is the key driver of profitability that we have. And Lawrence, summarised the other ones that are out there, but this is the key one. And like Liam Hanron's analysis, which is a long-term analysis, Lawrence's analysis in the last session, which is a small bit more short-term. But this is where we have to focus what we want to do. And the relationship is independent of midpoint. So, let's be clear about what we have to do. The other thing that we have to be clear about is, in the farming system that you have and that you operate, the cost of feed is grass, and grass clover swards. We've done this, we do this probably every year it doesn't really change that much. It changes slightly with, fertilizer costs, reseeding costs. But, the key competitive feed that you have inside your farm gate is grass. And it's really, when you look at the West, when you look at Europe and where Europe has gone, and you look at where we are, and, the last couple of years where we've gone, we need to kind of, be a bit more opportunistic and see the potential that we have. When you look at winter feed, 2-cut grass silage, and bale silage is about €220 to €250 per tonne of dry matter. It's far more costly than raised pasture, and then concentrate is dearer again. So look, we just have to focus on what we can grow better inside the farm gate. And what I'm going to do now in the next couple of slides is I'm going to show you where we are from pasture-based figures. And the good thing about this, and I said it to Kevin Moran yesterday, this is year figures, generated by us, measured by yourselves. And I know there's about 300 in the room here, but there's about, there's a lot more farmers measuring grass routinely, and that's what the future is, and we're going to have to do a lot more grass measurement. So when you look at the pasture-based grass growth curve for the last number of years, I've 2025 inside of this, which is the that red bar, deep red bar, and then I've just compared it for the last 5-year average and for the 10-year average. And I've just put the calving date statistics for the spring calving herd on top of that. And you look at it, where we are, spring, as you well know from all your farms, this is your data. We have very low growth rates here in spring. Again, we have, last year we had, a peak here in, let's say, the second or third week of May, then a drop off, a bit of a drought here, small bit of a drought here, and a very good back end. When we look at, let's say, what we've grown last year, there was a really good recovery last year in grass production. Nationally, it was about 13.2 tonne. So, which was about 900 kilos above the 5-year average and similar to the 10-year average. But the one thing that I want you to think about on your farms is, we have about 8% of the national herd calving are calved by the end of the first week of January. 53 are calved by the end of the first week, the end of the last week of March, by the 1st of March, and 81% calved by the 1st of April. Have you enough grass on your farm? Have you the capability of growing enough grass for these spring calving cows? Because I talked to farmers in January, at the end of January, and they could have 100 cows calved. We don't have an unbelievably large supply of feed, of grass in spring. I'll show you what it is in a minute. So you got to ask yourselves, in your farming system, am I calving cows? Do I have enough cows calved, or do I have enough feed on the farm to feed freshly calved cows if they're calving very early? Because when they're calved, you have to feed them. So that's the question you have to ask yourself. Lawrence put this up, and you can see, there has been a very good. I took out the previous 5 years from 2018. This was a bad year, challenged everybody as regards grass production, But you see here from 19 and 20 to the recovery that we got last year. And these were tough years. That was a horrendous year as regards March of 2024. Very little grazing took place in March 2024 with the weather that we got. And then there was droughts in 2023. So, look, we have had a real recovery. Okay, not every farm has got that recovery, but, we're getting back to where we should be. And there's a bit of an adaptation as regards nitrogen, using nitrogen better, bringing clover into the system, using our slurry better in the system in the last couple of years. And I think last year has kind of, with the climate that we had, has kind of showed that we can grow, we can get back to where we were. So then you look at the demographic of grass production across the country, and I suppose there was no real point in looking at this unless you looked at the mid-season rainfall that we have across the country. So I just put Moore Park all the way, from the synoptic spaces from Moore Park Grange, Athenry, the 2 airports, Knock and Cork, Shirk and Johnston Castle by the Hayes. And look, it's very clear, without going into all the rainfall data, that some of the mid-season rainfall is quite low in some of those sites, specifically, Cork Airport and Moore Park, compared to some of the other sites where, you're getting double the rainfall. And then if you look at Athenry, there's huge rainfall in the middle of the year and, high total. And, some of those, if you look at Grange, it had the least total amount of rainfall, but it had, very, very, if you look at Mead here, 13.5 tonne grass grown, an exceptional year. But you can see here, West Cork had a really good grass growing year, I didn't show that, but North Cork, Waterford, part of Kilkenny, Carlow, some of Wexford as well, would have had, let's say, a couple of droughts during 2025. But from here up, you can see there's substantially, and when you look at the data, the farms from the, probably from Limerick up would have had substantially, really good grass growing years. And that's, that brings a bit more confidence into the system. But then you look at the data and you look at it again, and when you're in research, you're always looking to see what can you learn from the data. So this is a matched sample of farmers from the start of pasture base to the present day, and I've just shown you the last 3 years of the data. So I broke it into the top third of performers, to the middle, to the bottom, and the mean. And I want you to focus on the top third of farms, and I want you to focus on the bottom third of farms. So in 2023, the top third of farms, you can see there, growing 15 tonne of grass. Bottom third of farms in 2023, 11 tonne of grass. 2025, 14.8 tonne of grass. And the bottom third here, 10.6 tonne of grass. And if you look at the difference here between the top third in each of the years, there's about an average about 4 tonne of grass between the top and the bottom. 4 tonne of grass. It's a lot of grass that'll feed a cow. It's basically a stocking rate difference. One cow, enough feed to feed a cow between the top third and the bottom third of farms. Then you look at the grazing dry matter, because in pasture base we can break down what goes into grazing and what goes into silage. 13 tonne versus 9.8 in 2023, and you come back here to 2025, 12.6 to 9.2, nearly 3 tonne of grass, grazing dry matter. This is the grass that was, basically allocated to the herd in those years. Again, 3 tonne. Then you look at what is the seasonality of the production of that grass. 2.2 for the top third in the spring versus 1.5, 2.2 versus 1.7 in 2025. Again, a half tonne of grass. Half tonne of grass, spring is worth a lot of money. Midsummer, 7 tonne versus 5 in 2023, 7 tonne versus 5.3 in 2025. Nearly 2 tonne of grass again, mid-season. And then we look at the autumn, 6.1 versus 4.4, 2023, 5.5 versus 4. So the top third of grass, the bottom third of grass, 4 tonne of grass, 3 tonne of grass in grazing dry matter, and you can see the seasonality difference. And then people talk about stocking rate and feeding cows of grass. You can see here, this is the grass allocated by the stock rate, divided the stock rates on these platforms, divided by the grazing dry matter produced. 4.1 versus 3.3, so you can see here, nearly a tonne of dry matter difference between grass allocated to those cows, between the top third and the bottom third, 4.1 versus 3.2. This is allocated grass, it's not utilised. So you can see here, ladies and gentlemen, a tonne of grass, a 20% difference in grass allocation between the top third and bottom third of farms. What is filling that gap then? You all know what's filling the gap. So, grazing management, again, the top third versus the bottom third, 8.1 grazings versus 7 in 2023, 8.2 versus 6.9 in 2025. So these guys in the top third, and they're coming up on the stage after, 2 of them, there's a lot more than just the 2 guys that are coming up on the stage after, but you can see 1.3 grazings in the difference. So these top third farmers are knocking more grazings off their paddocks. Why is that? Because they're producing more grass. So that's the grazing management effect that these guys are putting in place. And then you look at the total nitrogen input. And this is chemical and organic, 210 versus 166, 233 versus 205. So if I equated that back on a response factor of what nitrogen, kilos of nitrogen, it would equate back to about half a tonne of grass, the difference between the top third and the bottom third. So it's not nitrogen that's driving the difference here. It's the grazing management practice of the farmers. And here we are, just to summarise it, nearly 15 tonne of grass versus 10.6, 4.1 allocated to per cow to 3.2, 8 grazings, just over 8 grazings to just under 7. That's the difference between the top third and the bottom third. There's no Mentimeter in this presentation. All you got to do is go back home tonight and see where you rank on the Farm Summary Report pasture base with these lads. And if you get anything out of this talk tonight, do that. And that will show you where there is some, space to increase your grazing management practice on farms. So, breaking it down into 15 tonne, or it doesn't have to be 15 tonne, it can be 14 tonne, it can be just more than what you're achieving today. And it's 5 things that I've put this down to. One is grazing management, second is farm cover targets, third is farm soil fertility across the farm, nutrient management, and reseeding and clover swards. 5 things, the 5 things that are the fundamentals to growing grass on the farm. And when you look at this, the good thing about these targets, they've come in from a lot of the farms that I see in front of me. What is the target? Seasonal target to grow 15 tonne of grass. 2.5 tonne in the spring, 7 tonne in summer, 5.5 in the autumn. PPI for 5 years, 1.8, 6.2, 5.2. The top farms are very close to the target, 2.2, 6.8, 5.8, equating to about 14.8 tonne. And then the good thing about grazing management is concentrate input is part of that as well. If you're allocating more grass to cows, you don't have to allocate as much concentrate. And that's the target for concentrate. And I was thinking, would I put this up or wouldn't I put it up? Well, when I saw the target of 1.2, well, it's not a target, but I saw the result of 1.2 tonne and 1.3 tonne of concentrate fed per cow in Ireland at the moment to the average cow. I said, we need to put it up, because that's what we need to get back to. So it's 200 kilos in spring, 100 kilos in summer, and 260 kilos in the autumn, the 565. But you have to have the grass growing to be able to do this. And again, grazing management practice, I suppose, it's easy talk about it here at a conference on the 9th of January in Charlotte, but you have to go out and you have to put it in practice and you have to see the result of these, and then you have to benchmark yourself across the season. So these are the paddock grazings that we expect to get, and I've just put this at 10 grazings. It doesn't have to be 10 grazings, it's close to 9 grazings, close to 8 grazings, 8.5 grazings, that's fine. But this is, the mechanics that we would see of delivering grazings on paddocks. Starting in mid-February, 50-day first round, second round between 22 and 24 rounds. And here we see, you can get, there's farms in the audience that can get down to 15, 16 days when you get grass grow. Obviously when there's droughts there, that have to be extended. And then from mid-July, August on, we're building grass. And this is a key thing that we're going to talk about later on, is building grass in the autumn. If you don't have grass in the autumn, you can't feed cows cheap grass. And you're putting in other feeds. And then you have to close up. So that's the mechanics of having grazings or achieving grazings from paddocks. The next thing is farm cover targets. And the one thing about these, when we thought about this presentation, is these are time bound. We're talking about time bound targets that need to be achieved at different points in the season. And there's really only 4. Closing, opening, end of the first rotation, mid-September. The rest can be delivered by that target of kilos of dry matter per livestock unit. So you can go home today from this talk, there's really only 4 farm cover targets that you need to know in the season. The first one is the closing one. You don't close, you want to have grass in spring. So 750 is what our closing target is. 1,000 kilos is our opening target when cows go to pasture. 600 to 650 is the target when we finish the first round. And our target mid-season is 170 to 200 kilos. And then this target here that we keep missing is 1,100. So if I was to go through pasture base here, our opening cover would be about 850, which is just 100 above the closing cover. And here we're about 800 all the time. This target is about 550. This target is probably achieved about 550. But here is a crucial thing. We have 800 kilos of our average farm cover in the middle of September, 300 kilos below target. If it's 800 kilos in the middle of September, there's a pile of feed having to go in to keep cows at grass. And we just keep missing that, and we should be trying to get it. That's one target we have to get to. Soil fertility, And look, soil fertility at this stage for all of you is you just go and fix it. Do a soil test and fix it. It's one of these capital costs that you have on the farm every year. You know, most of you are probably measuring soil fertility probably annually or biannually, or every second year. And look, what we see is there has been progress made in soil fertility on dairy farms. It's about 21,000 samples in 2025. But you know, when you look at it and you look at the sum of the total, you know, 40% here suboptimal soil pH, 40% suboptimal soil P, 40% suboptimal soil K. When you look at putting them all together, about 25% of the soil is only at optimal soil fertility. And like, it's a self-defeating purpose here, because if the soil pH isn't right, the innate nitrogen efficiency is limited by about 30%. So whatever nitrogen you're spreading is only working at 70% with low soil pH. And sometimes when you talk about grassland, it's the invisible loss catches farms. You can't measure the milk tank, and you're measuring it by putting in feed at the end of the year. So I call that the invisible loss. Clover productivity, down by about 20% when you don't have proper pH. Clover establishment, virtually impossible, and clover persistence, virtually impossible with low soil pH. Up at 6.2, 6.3, that's where we need to be. And the other thing about looking at farms with high soil fertility, and Caitlin will tell you this as well, annual output is high where there's high soil fertility. The farmers are looking at the detail and the fingers on the pulse. There's very low variation in paddock, dry matter production. Like I could show you that where there's 2 ton between the top growing paddock and the lowest growing paddock on some of those farms. And there's oversowing success. There's oversowing success because the pH is right for clover to work. So then we get on to clover, and clover has been part of the adaptation that we have in grazing management for the last couple of years. You know, nitrogen can be fixed by high clover, can be fixed by high clover efficiently, but you need to have it working at the right time. And this is work that was put together from a couple of studies where you can look at the dotted line is nitrogen fixation, which is coming from the plant itself, and the clover content. And you all know, you all should know, clover is at a low level in the sward in early spring, and as it gains traction in clover content, you're getting more fixation delivered by the content of the clover in the sward. And you're peaking here in August and September. Peaking at about 20 kilos of fixation per month. So, like, what we understand by this, and like research, the one thing about research is nobody knows everything. And you put experiments on the floor or on the ground to, pick off different objectives to understand what's happening in swards. We know here from this that, clover is not fixing a lot of nitrogen early in spring, so there's a need to put chemical nitrogen on or organic nitrogen on to feed the pasture for it to get growth. And that's where this has come from, the next slide. Like, this is the nitrogen input linked to clover content. This is a total grass sward, and basically what we're saying is about 214 kilos of nitrogen across the season. And then this is linked to April clover content. As clover content increases, only in the mid-season is the nitrogen being reduced. The nitrogen in the spring, even at these levels of clover, and let's face it, the amount of paddocks that would be at 20% in April are low on most farms. Some farms wouldn't have anywhere near that. But the key thing for us is nitrogen goes on when clover's not fixing to make sure that the sward is growing. And nitrogen then is coming out of the system, then it's been replaced by soil water where there's high levels of clover in the mid-season period. And the guys in the Clover 150 group, the guys that are going to step up here in a minute, they have adapted to this during the season. And that's one of the key things that I always see in grazing management is, excuse me, you have to keep adapting, you have to keep thinking about where you can do better. And this is going to we're going to get this more and more correct, but we have to understand what the plant gives us and when it gives it to us. We've plenty of work to show what clover can do for an annual production, getting between 20 and 40 kilos of solids, but we have to get to manage it a lot better in the swards. The other thing about increasing grass dry matter production is reseeding. The guys that are in the top third, they're serial reseeders. It doesn't matter what the milk price is, they reseed their stuff. And they reseed because of what you're looking at behind me. This is some work we did a couple of years ago. 15% perennial ryegrass content versus 100% perennial ryegrass content. You can see this is the distribution seasonally and across the season. You know, putting nitrogen on, there's very low perennial ryegrass content. They were actually, this sward was actually 30% less productive, 30% less nitrogen efficient than the 100% grass sward. And you can see here, you know, if you don't have grass with these, you have to go back and supplement with something else. So low perennial ryegrass content swards completely compromises grass production, and it compromises here in the season where you want it, in the spring. And the production loss is equated to about €450 per hectare. Again, another invisible loss, because you're putting in feed to mask out what's happening on these paddocks. And like, you know, reseeding is one of the most cost-effective things. You know, that loss can be transferred within 2 years. The other thing then is, you know, clover and grass compatibility. We've done some work in the last couple of years looking at grazing utilisation for the ryegrass varieties with clover content. And what it's shown is, you know, it doesn't have any, if you know, if a variety is poorly grazed, you know, clover doesn't it improves it, but it doesn't re-rank the performance of that variety versus another variety. In the study here, clover contents range between 20 and 30%, and what we saw was with high grazing utilisation varieties, they had a positive effect in clover content. Clover content was quite high here. But what we saw was grazing utilisation with clover in the sward actually improved. So we're actually getting to the point, and we will get to the point, where, you know, and some of the guys here that are going to talk, there's no mechanical fixation of swards. We'll have varieties that you can graze, and in combination with clover, you don't have to top. So that'll be a job less. So the potential, and what's the summary of the potential for us? Dry matter production is driven by grazing management. The top third versus the bottom third clearly shows you that. And the seasonal growth targets that we have for 15 to 2.5 in spring, 7 in summer, and 2.5 and 5.5 in the autumn. And the focus has to be on driving more grazings from your paddocks. That's where the focus has to be. The timing, the two things I'm going to talk about here are time bound. That is the farm cover targets. I'm not talking about 750 in October, I'm talking about 750 in closing. Fertiliser management. I'm sorry, timing is crucial with this as well. We saw what happens in March 2024 when we couldn't get cows to grass, couldn't get fertiliser out, and we couldn't spread slurry. There was a ton of grass lost straight away that month. Fertiliser management, timing is crucial, and spring is crucial as well. And the annual investment is maintenance of soil fertility and sward renewal. That's what the top guys are doing. And like, there's a guy in Davis, he had a very good saying, you know, when you lie down with dogs, you should pick up fleas. So when you listen to these guys, you should pick up what they're doing, what works for those guys. They just do this, it's just part of the DNA. So the conclusions, all farms have potential to grow more pasture. And the management improvements is, ultimately you have to establish where your farm is grass limited. And what is it? Is it the soil? Is it the sward? Or is it your management? We know, and myself and Lawrence have given it to you now, increasing grass production and utilisation will make a difference to the business. And it's about getting consistency in the system. Grass-based systems is about consistency. And you know, whether milk price is low or high, you should knock a consistent margin out of the system with that. And concentrating bought-in feeds, they can't be dependent on the system. All you're doing is, unfortunately, is you're swapping nitrogen here. You're swapping nitrogen from 1.3 tonne and bought-in feed in many ways for chemical nitrogen. And you know, we have done that for the last 3 years. So the focus has to come back to producing milk from pasture. That's what the focus has to come back straight back to. So I'm going to leave you one thought. And the thought is, a bend in the road is not the end of the road unless you make the turn. Don't fail to make the turn. So I'll leave you with that thought.